Hello and welcome to IBTimes TV. I'm Leanna Brinded, Business Editor for the International Business Times. Joining me now is Jo Swinson. She's the Minister for Employment Relations and Consumer Affairs. So hi, thanks for joining us.
Hi.
One of the issues that's really been centred on over the last week or so have been 0 hours contracts. And while there are some companies that use it for seasonal work, there is a lot of criticism over every sector, not just government, but private and public sectors that still use these controversial forms of employment. What is BIS's stance and on this, and what are you investigating on that?
Well, of course, these contracts vary hugely. So, I mean, they range from some people who might have a 0 hours contract and get very little work to others who have a 0 hours contract but are getting fairly regular work of 20 or 30 hours a week from that contract and have quite a good relationship with their employer, where they also have a good degree of certainty about how much work is coming and may also get holiday pay and sick pay. They vary a lot. Also, in some cases, it's really helpful flexibility for the employee. If they want to be able to say, no, I don't want to work this week, I'm doing other things. Sometimes people who are doing portfolio working will have perhaps more than one of these types of contracts. But of course, there are also stories where they have been abused, where people haven't really had the right, or they don't feel like they've had the right to turn down work, for example, or they haven't felt that if they aren't getting work from one contract that they are easily able to go and find other work. So I think those are the types of issues that we really need to get to the bottom of. It has been slightly difficult to get good information on these contracts because not everybody always knows what kind of contract they're on, and so we've had these wildly varying estimates of how many people are on these contracts, and I think it's important that we get that information. We've got a review that BIS officials have been undertaking for some weeks now, and we expect the Secretary of State and myself to get that information by the beginning of next month, and then we'll be able to see whether any further action is needed to make sure that people are properly protected, while also making sure that what can be a useful tool for flexibility in employment, which, as you say, has perhaps been one of the reasons why we have had positive employment news, particularly recently in this country, despite the difficult economic challenges we've been facing. We want to make sure we get that balance right so that there's not abuse of individuals who are on 0 hours contracts, but there's best practice happening where they are a useful tool to be used.
Okay, so the review is more with the view to place minimal standards at least, rather than an outright ban of these kind of contracts?
Well, I think the practicalities of an outright ban would be very difficult indeed, because if you start to say that you have to have a minimum number of hours, where do you set that? If you set it at 1 or 2 hours, when you could say, well, that's pretty meaningless. If you start to set it at, say, 8 or 10 hours, then if you have somebody who only wants to work for 1 day a week because of their other responsibilities and they wanted a 7.5-hour contract a week, then they wouldn't be able to have that. So I think we would start to get into the realms very quickly of removing some of the flexibility that individuals would want, because people have a whole range of things going on in their lives. Some people work more than one job at the same time, and there's a whole set of reasons why people might want to work on either 0 hours contracts or indeed fairly low number of hours in a contract. So I think it's much better to look at how we can see what the problems are with these contracts and how those can be addressed, whether that's through better guidance and best practice, or whether there's any changes that need to be made in the operation of them to make sure that people aren't being exploited.
Well, thanks for joining us today and for your time.
Very nice to meet you. Thank you.
That was Jo Swinson. She's the Minister for Employment Relations and Consumer Affairs.